The lawyer's words shattered her world. You've inherited $500 million. But it wasn't the money that broke her. It was finally understanding why her mother had cried every Christmas morning. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would split Zara Williams' life into before and after. She fumbled for it in the darkness of her studio apartment, knocking over yesterday's cold coffee. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, a Boston area code that seemed too formal for her world of late rent notices and ramen dinners. Miss Williams? The voice was crisp, professional. This is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Richard Blackstone. Zara sat up, suddenly alert. I think you have the wrong number. I don't know anyone named. You are Zara Marie Williams, daughter of Celeste Williams? The mention of her mother's name sent a chill down her spine. Mama had been gone 3 years now. Taken by the cancer, they couldn't afford to fight properly. Yes, but... Miss Williams, I need you to come to Boston immediately. There's been a development regarding your inheritance. Zara almost laughed. My what? Sir, I think there's been a mistake. My mother was a maid. We don't have inheritances. The lawyer's pause stretched too long. Miss Williams, Richard Blackstone has left you his entire estate. $500 million. The phone slipped from her numb fingers. Hello, my dearest family. Before we begin, let us take a moment to lift each other in prayer. Heavenly Lord, please watch over everyone watching this story today, guide their steps, and fill their hearts with love and hope. Amen. Family, you are not just subscribers. You are my strength and my inspiration to keep creating. To those who just joined, welcome home. Kindly subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and let me know where you are watching from. I would love to meet you. Every story I share is a piece of me, my late nights, my dedication, my heart. When you leave too soon, it feels as though that sacrifice is unseen. Please stay with me until the very end. I love you all deeply. Now, let's begin our story. 3 hours later, Zara sat in the back of a Greyhound bus, staring at the crumpled piece of paper with the lawyer's address. She'd called in sick to both her jobs, the diner where she waited tables and the office building where she cleaned at night. The supervisor at the cleaning company had been particularly nasty about it. Just like your mother, he'd sneered. Unreliable when it counts. But Zara couldn't shake the lawyer's voice, or the way he'd said her mother's name. Like he'd known Celeste Williams personally. The bus pulled into Boston as afternoon shadows stretched long across the city. Zara had never seen buildings this tall, this gleaming. Her worn sneakers felt out of place on the marble floors of the law office building. The receptionist looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. You're here for Mr. Morrison? Yes, I'm Zara Williams. 23rd floor. He's expecting you. The elevator ride felt like ascending to another world. When the doors opened, James Morrison himself was waiting. A silver-haired man in a suit that probably cost more than Zara made in 6 months. Miss Williams. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but searching. Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, let's talk in my office. The office was all leather and mahogany, with windows overlooking a city Zara had only seen in movies. Morrison gestured to a chair across from his massive desk. I'm sure this is overwhelming, he began, but I need to explain some things about Richard Blackstone and why he's left you everything. I've never heard of him, Zara said quietly. I don't understand why. Richard Blackstone built Blackstone Industries from nothing. Real estate, technology, investments. When he died last week, he was worth approximately $500 million. Morrison opened a thick folder. And he's left it all to you. Zara's head spun. But why? I'm nobody. I'm a waitress from Detroit who can barely afford. Because, Morrison interrupted gently, according to his final instructions, you're his daughter. The words hit Zara like a physical blow. That's impossible. My father died when I was 2. Mama told me. She said he was killed in an accident. Morrison's expression grew complicated. Miss Williams, what did your mother tell you about where she worked? She cleaned houses. Rich people's houses mostly, but she never talked about it much. Said it wasn't important. Zora's voice grew smaller. She said the people she worked for treated her like she was invisible. Your mother worked for Richard Blackstone for 15 years. She was his housekeeper. The room seemed to tilt. Zora gripped the arms of her chair. No, she would have told me. If she worked for if he was there's more. Morrison slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Richard left this for you. In his own words. With trembling fingers, Zora broke the seal. The handwriting inside was strong, masculine. Zora, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you finally know the truth your mother made me swear to keep. I loved Celeste Williams with everything I had, but I was a coward. A married coward who chose his reputation over the woman who gave him the greatest gift of his life. You. I watched you grow up from a distance. Every school play, every graduation, every achievement. Your mother sent me pictures, updates, always making sure you never knew. She protected you from a world that would have judged you for my failures. I know money can't make up for 30 years of absence, but it's all I have left to give. Use it to build the life you deserve. The life I was too weak to help you build. You have my eyes, my stubborn streak, and thank God, your mother's heart. I love you, daughter. Richard. Zora's hands shook as she lowered the letter. He knew about me? All this time? Morrison nodded grimly. There's something else. The reason your mother left his employment so suddenly 28 years ago. He slid another document across the desk. It was a hospital record. Zora's birth certificate, but not the one she'd always seen. This one listed Richard Blackstone as the father. Your mother changed your birth certificate to protect you both. Richard was married to Victoria Blackstone, a woman from old Boston money. Very connected, very vindictive. When she discovered the affair, what happened? She threatened to destroy your mother's life, have her arrested on false charges, make sure she never worked again. But Victoria made a mistake. She also threatened you. Zora looked up sharply. Richard recorded that conversation. He kept it all these years. Victoria didn't just threaten your mother's reputation. She threatened to have you taken away and placed in foster care, claimed Celeste was an unfit mother. The pieces were falling into place, each one more painful than the last. So Mama left. She disappeared overnight. Changed her name from Celeste Johnson back to her maiden name, Williams. Moved to Detroit. Started over with nothing to protect you. Zora stood abruptly, anger flashing through her grief. He let her go. He had money, power, influence. He could have protected us. Instead, he let my mother clean houses for minimum wage while he lived in mansions. Zora, do you know what it's like to watch your mother work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your head? To see her hands crack and bleed from cleaning chemicals? To hold her while she cried because she couldn't afford my school supplies? Morrison's voice was quiet. He tried to send money. Every month for 30 years. Your mother sent every check back unopened. The fight went out of Zora like air from a punctured balloon. She sank back into the chair. She was proud, Morrison continued. Too proud to take what she saw as guilt money. But she never stopped loving him. In her final letter to Richard, yes, she wrote to him when she was diagnosed. She said her only regret was that you never got to know your father. Tears streamed down Zora's face. She never told me any of this. Because she was protecting you from pain she thought was hers to carry alone. Morrison opened another folder. There's one more thing. Richard didn't just leave you money, Zora. He left you a family. What do you mean? Richard and Victoria never had children. But Richard has a half-brother, Marcus Blackstone, who's been running the company operations. Marcus has 2 daughters, your half-cousins. They don't know about you yet. Zora's world tilted again. Family. Richard's instructions were specific. He wants you to meet them before you decide what to do with the inheritance. He hoped He hoped you might find the family your mother never let him give you. The weight of it all, the money, the father she'd never known, the family waiting to meet her, crashed down on Zara like a wave. She doubled over, sobbing for the mother who'd carried these secrets, for the father who'd been too weak to claim her, for the life they might have had. Morrison came around the desk and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I know this is overwhelming. Richard arranged for you to stay at his estate while you process everything. The staff is expecting you. The staff? Zara looked up through her tears. Yes, including Maria Santos, who worked alongside your mother for several years before Celeste left. She's been asking about you for 3 decades. As the taxi pulled up to the Blackstone estate an hour later, Zara stared through the window at a mansion that looked like something from a fairy tale. Perfectly manicured gardens, a circular drive with a fountain, windows that gleamed like jewels in the setting sun. Somewhere in this house, her mother had worked. Somewhere in these rooms, her parents had fallen in love. And somewhere in this new reality, she had to figure out who Zara Williams was meant to become. The front door opened before she could knock. A small Latina woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes stepped out. Zara? The woman's voice broke. Oh, me Nina, you look just like her. Just like my Celeste. And for the first time in 3 years, Zara fell into the arms of someone who had loved her mother too. What do you think drove Celeste to keep such a life-changing secret from her daughter for 30 years? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the greatest acts of love require the greatest sacrifices. Maria Santos held Zara for what felt like hours on the mansion's front steps, both women crying for a woman who had been gone too long. When they finally separated, Maria cupped Zara's face in weathered hands. She talked about you every day, Maria whispered. Every single day for 15 years. My Zara is so smart, Maria. My Zara is going to college. My Zara is going to have everything I never could give her. You knew her that well? We cleaned this house together. Celeste was my best friend, and when she disappeared, Maria's eyes filled again. I thought I'd lost her forever. Mr. Richard, he was never the same after she left. Maria led Zara through the front door into a foyer that took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with cherubs, and a marble staircase curved up to the second floor like something from a movie. This is overwhelming, Zara breathed. Wait until you see your room. Maria smiled through her tears. Mr. Richard, he kept it ready for you. Always said someday you'd come home. They climbed the staircase, Maria chattering in rapid Spanish mixed with English, the way Zara remembered her mother doing when she was emotional. At the top, Maria opened a door to reveal a bedroom that made Zara's studio apartment look like a closet. But it wasn't the size that stopped her cold. It was the photographs. Dozens of them, covering an entire wall. Pictures of her at every age. First steps, kindergarten graduation, high school prom, college graduation. Pictures she'd never seen before, taken from a distance by someone who'd cared enough to capture every milestone. How did he get these? Zara's voice was barely a whisper. Maria's smile was sad. Your mama. She sent them. Not to him directly, but through Mr. Morrison. She made the lawyer promise never to tell Mr. Richard where you were, but she gestured at the wall. A father finds a way to watch his daughter grow up. Zara moved closer to the photos. In one, she was maybe 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning at her elementary school science fair. She remembered that day. Mama had taken 2 buses to get there, still wearing her cleaning uniform because she'd come straight from work. She loved you so much, Mija, Maria said softly. But she loved him too. That's why she had to leave. Tell me about them, Zara said, still staring at the photos. About my parents. The real story. Maria sat heavily on the bed. Sit with me. This story, it's not simple. Zara perched on the edge of the mattress, afraid to disturb the pristine white comforter. Your mama came here in 1995. She was 19, just moved from Puerto Rico, needed work. Mr. Richard, He was maybe 25 then, already married to Miss Victoria, but... Maria made a face. That marriage, it was business. Her family had money, connections he needed for the company. No love there, just contracts. So when Mama came along, ay Dios mío, the sparks, Mija, like lightning in this house. Your Mama was beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was smart, funny, kind. She saw Mr. Richard not as the rich boss, but as a man who worked 18 hours a day and forgot to eat. Maria's eyes grew distant. She started leaving little notes with his lunch. Jokes, quotes from books she was reading at the library. He would save every one. They fell in love. Slowly, then all at once. For 2 years, they tried to stay professional. But love? Maria shrugged. Love doesn't care about marriage contracts or different worlds. Zora felt tears threatening again. What was he like? Really like? Lonely, Maria said immediately. So lonely, even in this big house full of people. Miss Victoria, she traveled constantly. Europe, New York, anywhere but here. She had her own life, her own friends. The way Maria said friends suggested they were more than friends. Mr. Richard worked all the time, because work was all he had. Until your Mama. She made him laugh, made him remember there was life outside boardrooms and business deals. So what happened? How did they? Maria's expression grew tender. The night you were conceived, Miss Victoria had been gone for 3 months. There was a storm. You know how storms can be here, wild and electric. The power went out, and your Mama was scared. She found Mr. Richard in his study, working by candlelight. And he held her until the storm passed. They talked all night about everything, her dreams, his fears, the life they wished they could have together. Maria smiled. 9 months later, you arrived. But Miss Victoria found out before you were born, Maria continued, her voice hardening. She hired private investigators, had pictures of your Mama and Mr. Richard together, photos of Celeste's growing belly. Zora's stomach dropped. She knew about me. She knew everything. And she used it. Maria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. Miss Victoria came back from one of her trips early. Caught your Mama in the nursery Mr. Richard had set up for you. There was a nursery? Right down the hall. He painted it himself. Yellow walls with white clouds, because he didn't know if you'd be a boy or girl. Had books, toys, a rocking chair by the window where he planned to read to you every night. The image broke Zora's heart. What did Victoria do? She destroyed it. Everything. Had the maintenance crew paint over the clouds, threw out every toy, every book. And then she called your Mama into the main parlor. Maria's hands clenched at her sides. I was polishing silver in the dining room. I heard every word. What did she say? That your Mama was a home-wrecking whore who'd seduced her husband. That she'd make sure Celeste never worked again, never found decent housing, never had a moment's peace. Maria turned back to Zora, tears in her eyes. But the worst part was what she said about you. Zora's blood ran cold. What about me? She said she'd have you taken away the moment you were born. That she knew people in social services, judges, police. That a poor Puerto Rican girl with no family and no money would never be able to keep her baby if the right people made the right calls. The cruelty of it hit Zora like a physical blow. She threatened to take me from my mother. But your Mama, she was fierce when it came to you. She stood up to Miss Victoria, all 5 feet of her facing down this tall, cold woman with all her money and power. She said, "You can destroy me, but you will never touch my daughter." That's when she left. That night, she packed one bag, left a letter for Mr. Richard, and disappeared. He came home from a business trip to find her gone, the nursery destroyed, and his wife acting like nothing had happened. Zora was quiet for a long moment, processing the pain her parents had endured. Did he try to find us? For months. He hired investigators, offered rewards, called every Celeste Williams in America. But your Mama was smart. She'd changed back to her maiden name, moved to a city with no connections to Boston. She erased herself to protect you. And my father just gave up? Maria's expression grew fierce. He never gave up. Every year on your birthday, he'd disappear for days. I found out later he was going to Detroit, walking through your neighborhood, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. He saw you once, when you were 7, playing in a park near your school. He saw me. You were on the swings, laughing with friends. He said later it was the most beautiful and heartbreaking moment of his life. Seeing his daughter happy, and knowing he couldn't be part of that happiness. Zara covered her face with her hands. The weight of all this lost time, all this wasted love, felt unbearable. There's something else, Maria said gently. Something that might help you understand. She walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer, pulling out a wooden box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Your mama's letters to Mr. Richard. She wrote to him every month for 30 years, but never sent them. Until the cancer came. She sent them then? Just one. To tell him she was dying, and to ask him to watch over you when she was gone. Maria's voice broke. She said she'd carried his love with her every day, that you were the greatest gift he'd ever given her, and that her only regret was keeping you apart. Zara untied the ribbon with shaking hands and opened the top letter. Her mother's familiar handwriting swam before her eyes. My dearest Richard, today Zara lost her first tooth. She put it under her pillow and asked me if the tooth fairy was real. I told her that sometimes magic comes from the people who love us most, even when we can't see them. I think about you every day. I wonder if you still work too late, if you still forget to eat lunch, if you still save the comics from the Sunday paper like you used to do. I hope you found happiness. I hope you found love. Our daughter is magnificent, Richard. She has your stubborn streak and your brilliant mind. She reads everything she can get her hands on, just like her father. Yesterday, she told me she wants to be a teacher, so she can help other kids learn to love books the way she does. I know you think I was wrong to take her away. Maybe I was. But I couldn't bear the thought of our love, something so pure and beautiful, being twisted into something ugly by people who could never understand. She asks about her father sometimes. I tell her you were a good man who loved her very much, but had to go away. It's not a lie, even if it's not the whole truth. I love you still. I love you always. Celeste. Tears streamed down Zara's face as she read letter after letter. 30 years of a mother's love, a father's loss, and a daughter's absence that had shaped all their lives. She never stopped loving him, Zara whispered. Never. And he never stopped loving both of you. Maria sat beside her again. The last 10 years of his life, after Miss Victoria finally died, he was different. Softer. He started a scholarship fund for single mothers wanting to go to college. He donated millions to literacy programs. He was trying to honor your mama's memory and help other families like yours. Victoria's dead? 8 years now. Heart attack in her sleep. They say Mr. Richard didn't even attend the funeral. A new wave of grief washed over Zara, not just for her parents' lost love, but for the grandmother she'd never know, the years of family dinners and bedtime stories and birthday celebrations that had been stolen from all of them. I need some air, she said suddenly, standing and walking to the window. Outside, the garden was bathed in golden evening light. She could see a bench beneath an old oak tree, and something about it called to her. That's where they used to sit together, Maria said, following her gaze. Sunday mornings when Miss Victoria was away. Your mama would make coffee, and they'd sit under that tree talking about books, about dreams, about the life they wished they could build together. I want to see it. They walked through the house to the back door, Maria pointing out little details along the way. Your mama polished that banister every Tuesday. She always said it was the most beautiful wood she'd ever seen. And that's the kitchen where she learned to make Mr. Richard's favorite meal, arroz con pollo, the way her grandmother taught her. The bench was exactly as Zara had imagined, worn smooth by years of use, positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun. She sat down and closed her eyes, trying to feel some connection to the parents who had once been happy here. They carved their initials, Maria said quietly. Zora looked down, and there they were, hidden on the underside of the bench. RB plus CW, surrounded by a heart that had been carefully etched into the wood. He did that the day before she left, Maria continued. He was going to show it to her when he got back from his business trip. Instead, he came home to find her gone. The full tragedy of it hit Zara then, not just the 30 years of separation, but all the small moments that had been lost. The bedtime stories, the scraped knees kissed better, the proud moments at school plays and graduations. All of it sacrificed to protect her from a world that would have judged her parents' love. I don't know if I can do this, Zara said quietly. Take his money, live in his house, pretend to be the daughter he never got to raise. Mija, Maria said gently, you don't have to pretend to be anything. You are exactly who your mama raised you to be, strong, kind, smart, independent. The money, the house, these are just things. What matters is that you finally know the truth about love that shaped your life. But what about his family? His brother and nieces who are about to discover I exist? Maria's expression grew complicated. That's tomorrow's worry. Marcus is complicated. The girls are sweet, but they've lived a very different life than you. There will be challenges. Do you think they'll accept me? I think they'll have no choice but to try. Mr. Richards will is ironclad. But acceptance and understanding, those take time. As they sat in the gathering dusk, Zara felt the weight of her new reality settling around her like an unfamiliar coat. She was no longer just Zara Williams, waitress from Detroit. She was Zara Blackstone, heiress to a fortune built on love, loss, and 30 years of sacrifice. There's one more thing, Maria said as they prepared to go back inside. Tomorrow, Mr. Morrison wants to take you to see your mama's grave. Mr. Richard bought her a headstone, a beautiful one with both their names on it. He wanted to be buried beside her when his time came. Zora's breath caught. They're buried together? Side by side. Finally together again. Maria smiled through her tears. Your mama would have liked that. She always said death was just another door, and maybe on the other side, they could love each other openly at last. As they walked back toward the house, Zara looked up at the windows glowing with warm light. Somewhere in those rooms, her story had begun. Tomorrow, she would meet the family who had never known she existed. And somehow, she would have to figure out how to honor both the mother who had sacrificed everything to protect her, and the father who had loved them both from a distance. The inheritance of $500 million was nothing compared to the inheritance of secrets, love, and loss that now belonged to her. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years since her mother's death, Zara didn't feel completely alone in the world. Zara barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face, young and hopeful in the photographs Maria had shown her, tired and worn in Zara's memories from their final years together. How different would their lives have been if Victoria Blackstone had possessed even a shred of compassion? At dawn, she found herself back in the garden, sitting on her parents' bench with a cup of coffee Maria had pressed into her hands. The morning mist hung over the perfectly manicured lawn like a shroud, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the groundskeepers beginning their work. You're up early. The voice startled her. A man emerged from the house, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of her own. He wore an expensive suit even at 7 a.m., and his expression was unreadable. You must be Marcus, she said, standing. And you must be the surprise that's turned my family upside down. His tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. Marcus Blackstone. I'm your uncle, I suppose. The word hung awkwardly between them. Marcus studied her face with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. You have his eyes, he said finally. Richard's eyes. And his stubborn chin. So I've been told. Marcus sat on the bench without invitation, and after a moment's hesitation, Zara joined him. They sat in silence, two strangers bound by blood and circumstance. "I knew about the affair," Marcus said suddenly. "Not about you, but about Celeste. Richard was different when she worked here. Happier, more human. You didn't approve?" "I didn't disapprove. Victoria was a cold woman who made my brother's life miserable. If he found some warmth with someone who genuinely cared for him..." Marcus shrugged. "I just wished he'd been brave enough to leave her. Maybe he would have, if Victoria hadn't threatened to take me away." Marcus turned to look at her sharply. "Is that what happened? We never knew why Celeste left so suddenly." Zora told him what Maria had shared: Victoria's threats, her mother's midnight escape, the 30 years of exile that followed. With each detail, Marcus's expression grew darker. "That sounds like Victoria," he said grimly. "She destroyed everything she touched, including my brother's chance at real happiness." "There's something you should know," Marcus continued, his voice carefully neutral. "My daughters, they're not taking the news of your existence very well. I didn't expect them to. This changes their inheritance, doesn't it? It changes everything. They were set to inherit the company, the estate, everything Richard built. Now," he gestured around them, "now they have a half-cousin they've never met who owns it all." The weight of it settled on Zora's shoulders. "I never asked for any of this." "No, but you have it. The question is what you'll do with it." Before Zora could respond, the back door of the house flew open with enough force to rattle the windows. Two women stormed across the garden toward them. One in her early 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes. The other slightly younger with the same coloring but sharper features. "So this is her," the older one said, stopping directly in front of Zora. "The bastard daughter who's stolen our inheritance." "Isabella," Marcus warned, but his daughter ignored him. "Do you have any idea what this family has been through?" Isabella's voice was ice-cold fury. "Do you know how hard we've worked to build Blackstone Industries into what it is today?" The younger daughter, who had to be Sophia, stepped up beside her sister. Where Isabella was fire, Sophia was calculating precision. "Let's be honest about what this is," Sophia said, her voice eerily calm. "You're a con artist. Some trailer trash who heard about Uncle Richard's death and convinced a lawyer you're his long-lost daughter." The insult hit Zora like a slap, but she stood her ground. "I have DNA tests, birth certificates, love letters between my parents that span 30 years. All of which could be faked," Isabella snapped. "Do you think we're idiots? You show up here with your Walmart clothes and your sob story about your poor dead mother. Don't." Zora's voice went deadly quiet. "Don't you dare talk about my mother." "Why not? She was a maid who seduced a married man. That makes her a..." Zora was on her feet and moving before she realized it, her hand raised. Marcus caught her wrist inches from Isabella's face. "Enough," he said firmly. "All of you." "She was going to hit me," Isabella shrieked. "You insulted her dead mother," Marcus replied evenly. "I'd have let her." Sophia stepped forward, her eyes glittering dangerously. "Actually, Isabella, maybe we should hear her out. After all, if she really is Uncle Richard's daughter, she'll want to know about dear old Dad's little hobbies." "Sophia, don't," Marcus warned. "Don't what, Daddy? Don't tell her the truth? That Uncle Richard wasn't the saint everyone's making him out to be." Zora felt ice in her veins. "What are you talking about?" "Your father," Sophia said with vicious satisfaction, "had quite the reputation with the help. Did you think your mother was his only affair? He went through maids like tissues. Always young, always vulnerable, always women who needed their jobs too much to say no." "That's not true." But even as Zora said it, doubt crept into her voice. "Ask Maria," Isabella chimed in, emboldened by her sister's attack. "Ask her about Carmen, who left suddenly in 2010. Or Elena, who was fired without reference in 2015. Your precious daddy had a pattern." The ground seemed to shift beneath Zora's feet. "You're lying." "Am I?" Sophia pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos. Here's Elena's daughter. Cute kid. Born 9 months after she left. Looks a bit like you, actually. The photo showed a young girl with dark hair and familiar eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like Zara's own reflection. You're saying I have sisters? Half-sisters, Sophia corrected with cruel precision. At least 3 that we know of. Daddy Dearest was busy after your mother left. Apparently, losing one family made him want to create several more. Zara sank back onto the bench, her world tilting again. The father she'd been learning to love, the man who'd kept her pictures, who'd written her loving letters. Had he really been a serial predator? That's enough, Marcus said sharply. You've made your point. Have we? Isabella's voice was shrill. Because I want her to understand exactly what kind of man her father was before she starts playing the grieving daughter card. They're lying, Zara whispered, but the words felt hollow. We have documentation, Sophia said matter-of-factly. Private investigator reports. Settlements Richard paid to keep the women quiet. Birth certificates. He may have loved your mother once, but after she left, he became something else entirely. Maria appeared from the house, moving faster than Zara had seen her move since she'd arrived. Her face was thunderous as she marched across the garden. Mentirosas, she spat at the sisters. You wicked, lying girls. Ah, Maria, Isabella said sweetly. We were just telling our new cousin about Uncle Richard's extended family. Those women were nothing like Celeste, Maria said fiercely. Yes, Mr. Richard had relationships after your mama left, but they were affairs between consenting adults. Lonely women and a lonely man finding comfort together. Not the evil thing these brujos are suggesting. So you admit he had other children? Zara's voice was barely audible. Maria's expression softened with compassion. 3 that I know of. But Mija, listen to me. None of those relationships were like what he had with your mother. Celeste was the love of his life. The others, they were just broken pieces of a man trying to fill a hole that could never be filled. Did he support them? The other children? Every one. College funds, medical bills, whatever they needed. But he never tried to replace you and your mama. You were always his heart. The complexity of it overwhelmed Zara. Her father wasn't the simple victim of circumstance she'd imagined, but he also wasn't the predator his nieces were painting him as. He was something more complicated. A man who'd made choices, some good and some questionable, all shaped by the loss of the woman he'd truly loved. This doesn't change anything, Sophia said coldly. You're still stealing what rightfully belongs to our family. I didn't ask for any of this, Zara repeated. Then give it back, Isabella challenged. Sign papers renouncing the inheritance. Walk away like your mother did. For a moment, Zara was tempted. The money felt tainted now, complicated by the knowledge of her father's other relationships and children. But then she thought of her mother, working 3 jobs while Richard Blackstone's other children went to private schools and summer camps funded by his guilt money. No, she said quietly. Excuse me? Zara stood, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. I said no. My mother sacrificed everything to protect me from people like your mother. People who thought love had to fit into neat little boxes with proper social standing and matching bank accounts. She worked herself to death, so I could have a chance at the life she never had. So you admit you're just here for the money, Sophia said triumphantly. I'm here for the truth, Zara corrected. About my parents, about my family, about the life I should have had. The money is just a tool. A tool for what? Marcus asked, and for the first time, his voice held genuine curiosity rather than wariness. Zara looked around at the estate, the family that was both hers and not hers, the legacy of love and loss that had shaped all their lives. An idea was forming, one that honored both her mother's sacrifice and her father's complicated attempts at redemption. A tool for change, she said finally. For making sure no other child grows up wondering why their parent had to choose between love and security. For creating opportunities for families like mine, single mothers, kids from the wrong side of town, people who deserve a chance but never get one. Isabella laughed harshly. You're going to give away $500 million? Not give it away. Use it. Build something that matters. Zara turned to Marcus. You know the business better than anyone. Help me turn Blackstone Industries into something that creates opportunities instead of just hoarding wealth. And if we refuse? Sophia asked. Then I'll figure it out myself. But I think you're better people than you're pretending to be right now. I think you're scared and grieving and lashing out because your world just changed in ways you can't control. Isabella's facade cracked for just a moment, revealing the scared young woman underneath. You don't understand. Blackstone Industries is all we've ever known. It's our identity, our purpose. If you take that away, I'm not taking anything away. I'm asking you to help me build something better. Sophia stared at her for a long moment. You really believe you can change things? That throwing money at problems will somehow fix the world? No, Zara said honestly. But I believe doing nothing guarantees nothing changes. And I've seen what happens when good people do nothing while bad people destroy lives. The garden fell silent except for the distant sound of morning traffic beginning to filter through the trees. For people stood facing each other, uncle, nieces, and newfound family member, each carrying their own version of grief and hope and fear. Finally, Marcus spoke. Richard left you everything because he believed you'd know what to do with it. I'm beginning to think he might have been right. Daddy, Isabella protested. No, Isabella. I've watched this company for 30 years, seen how wealth can isolate and corrupt. Maybe it's time for something different. Sophia's expression was unreadable. What exactly are you proposing? Partnership, Zara said simply. I may own the money, but you understand the business. Together, we could build something Richard and Celeste would have been proud of. And if we say yes? Marcus asked. What then? Zara looked up at the house where her parents had fallen in love, where her mother had made the hardest choice of her life, where her father had spent 30 years mourning what he'd lost. Then we honor their memory by creating the life they dreamed of, but never got to live. One where love doesn't have to choose between happiness and survival. The sun was fully up now, burning away the morning mist and illuminating the garden in golden light. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 8 o'clock, marking the beginning of a new day. And for the first time since she'd learned of her inheritance, Zara felt like she understood why her father had left her everything. Not as compensation for 30 years of absence, but as the tools to build something better from the wreckage of their family's past. The question now was whether the family he'd left behind would help her do it. 3 days later, Zara found herself in the boardroom of Blackstone Industries, staring at financial reports that made her head spin. The mahogany table could seat 20 people, but today it held only 5. Herself, Marcus, Isabella, Sophia, and James Morrison, who was explaining the intricacies of her inheritance with the patience of a man who'd done this many times before. The real estate portfolio alone is worth approximately $150 million, Morrison was saying, sliding another folder across the table. That includes this estate, the penthouse in Manhattan, the cabin in Vermont, and commercial properties in 12 states. Don't forget the art collection, Sophia added dryly. Uncle Richard had expensive taste in dead painters. Zara barely heard them. Her attention was fixed on a photograph Morrison had just revealed. A picture of her mother at what looked like a company Christmas party, wearing a simple black dress and smiling at someone just outside the frame. When was this taken? She asked, picking up the photo. December 1996, Marcus answered. A few months before you were born. Richard kept it on his desk for 30 years. In the photo, Celeste looked radiant, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. But it was her expression that broke Zara's heart, the look of a woman completely, hopelessly in love. She was beautiful, Isabella said quietly, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no malice in her voice. She was 19 years old, Zara replied, not looking up from the photo. Alone in a foreign country, working for a man whose wife would have destroyed her if she could. But she wasn't destroyed, Sophia pointed out. She got away, built a life, raised you, in poverty, working 3 jobs, never able to trust anyone enough to fall in love again because she was too afraid of what powerful people might do to the people she cared about. The room fell silent. Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should focus on the immediate decisions that need to be made. The company's board of directors is expecting some kind of statement about the change in ownership. What have you told them? Zora asked. That Richard has an heir who's taking control of the company. They're concerned about the transition. Marcus snorted. They're terrified that someone who doesn't understand their world is about to upset their very comfortable arrangements. What kind of arrangements? Isabella and Sophia exchanged a look that didn't escape Zora's notice. The kind where profits matter more than people, Marcus said carefully. Richard wasn't always the Saint Maria remembers. He built this company by making hard choices that didn't always benefit the workers. Show her the Riverside project, Sophia said suddenly. Sophia, Isabella warned. No, she should know. If she's going to play savior with Daddy's money, she should understand what that money was built on. Morrison reluctantly opened another folder. Riverside was a low-income housing development in East Boston. Blackstone Industries bought the land in 2018 and displaced 300 families in the process, Marcus added grimly. Families who'd lived there for generations. We offered them relocation assistance, but it wasn't enough to stay in the neighborhood. Most ended up scattered across the city, away from their jobs, their schools, their communities. Zora stared at the before and after photos. Where rows of modest but well-maintained apartments had once stood, gleaming luxury condos now rose toward the sky. Your father approved that project, Isabella said bluntly. Signed the papers himself. Why are you telling me this? Zora asked, though she suspected she knew. Because you're sitting here talking about using his money to help people like those families, when that very money came from displacing them in the first place, Sophia replied. It's hypocritical. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. How could she use money built on other people's suffering to ease suffering? But as she stared at the photos, another question formed in her mind. When did this project get approved? She asked Morrison. The final papers were signed in March 2019, 3 months after my mother died. Zora looked up at the faces around the table. He knew she was dying by then. They'd been corresponding. So, Isabella challenged. So maybe he wasn't the same man who fell in love with a 19-year-old maid. Maybe 30 years of grief and guilt changed him into someone who could sign papers that destroyed communities, because he'd already lost everything that mattered to him. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. Are you making excuses for him? I'm trying to understand him. There's a difference. Understanding doesn't change what he did, Sophia said. Those families are still displaced. The damage is done. You're right. Zara stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, 300 families were living with the consequences of her father's choices. So what are we going to do about it? We. Isabella's voice was sharp. Yes, we. You said I don't understand the business, and you're right. But you do. You've been working here for years, watching these decisions get made. Did you ever try to stop them? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella's cheeks flushed red. It wasn't our place. We were junior executives, and Uncle Richard had final approval, yes. But you had voices. You could have spoken up. And accomplished what? Sophia shot back. Getting ourselves fired? Richard didn't surround himself with people who disagreed with him. Except that's not true, is it? Zora turned back to face them. Marcus, you disagreed with him about business decisions all the time. Marcus nodded slowly. Richard and I fought constantly about the company's direction, especially in his later years, after Victoria died. Because you thought he was making mistakes? Because I thought he was making decisions out of pain instead of principle. After your mother died, he became harder, more ruthless, like he was punishing the world for taking away the only thing he'd ever really wanted. The pieces were falling into place for Zora, a picture of a man who'd spent 3 decades building wealth as a monument to his lost love, but who'd lost himself in the process. The Richard Blackstone who'd carved his and Celeste's initials in a garden bench wasn't the same man who'd signed papers displacing 300 families. Then we're going to undo it, she said quietly. Undo what? Morrison asked. All of it. Every decision he made out of pain instead of principle. Starting with Riverside. Isabella laughed harshly. You can't just wave a magic wand and fix decades of business decisions. Those condos are built. The families are gone. You can't turn back time. No, but I can acknowledge the harm and try to make amends. What would it cost to provide real relocation assistance to those families? Not just moving expenses, but down payments on homes in neighborhoods they choose, job training, education assistance for their children. Morrison was already calculating on his laptop. Conservatively, $50 million. Then that's what we'll do. You're talking about giving away 10% of your inheritance to fix one mistake, Sophia said incredulously. I'm talking about taking responsibility for the harm done in my family's name. Zora sat back down at the table. And it won't be the last time. The board will never approve it, Isabella warned. The board works for me now. They'll approve whatever I tell them to approve. You can't run a company like that, Marcus said, but his tone was more concerned than critical. If you start second-guessing every decision Richard ever made, you'll bankrupt the company within a year. Then help me make better decisions going forward. All of you. Sophia stared at her for a long moment. You're serious about the partnership thing, aren't you? Dead serious. I don't want to be a figurehead owner who shows up for board meetings and collects dividends. I want to be part of changing what this company is and what it stands for. Even if it means less profit? Especially if it means less profit. Zara pulled out her phone and showed them a photo from her old life. The diner where she'd worked, with its cracked vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights. I've been poor my entire life. I know how to live on less. What I don't know how to live with is the knowledge that my comfort comes from other people's suffering. Isabella's expression softened slightly. You really are nothing like what we expected. What did you expect? Some gold-digging trailer trash who'd sell everything for quick cash, Sophia admitted. Or a naive idealist who'd give it all away and feel good about herself while the company collapsed. Maybe I'm a little of both, Zora said honestly. But I'm also my mother's daughter. She taught me that you can't build happiness on other people's pain. Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. And what if the company fights back? What if changing direction means losing contracts, laying off employees, disappointing shareholders who've invested based on our current business model? Then we'll deal with those consequences as they come. But we'll deal with them honestly, as a family. The word hung between them, family. Not the family any of them had planned on, but the one they'd been given. There's something else you should know, Morrison said quietly. About the other children Richard fathered. Zora's stomach tightened. What about them? He left them provisions in his will too. Not inheritance, but trust funds that will provide for their education, healthcare, and basic living expenses until they turn 30. How much? 5 million each. 15 million total. So her father had taken care of his other children, even if he hadn't claimed them publicly. It was both a relief and another complication in her growing understanding of who Richard Blackstone had been. I want to meet them, she said impulsively. Zora, Marcus warned. That might not be wise. Some of those relationships didn't end well. I don't care. They're my half-sisters. They deserve to know they have family who cares about them. Even if they don't care about you? Sophia asked. Even then. Isabella stood abruptly and walked to the window. When she turned back, Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Do you know what it was like growing up in Uncle Richard's shadow?" she asked. "Having to be perfect all the time, because we were Blackstones. Never being able to make mistakes, because mistakes reflected on the family name." "I can't imagine," Zara said honestly. "And then to find out that while we were killing ourselves to be worthy of the name, he had other children. Children he loved just for existing. It felt like everything we'd sacrificed meant nothing." "But that's not true," Zara said gently. "He loved you both. Marcus has told me how proud he was of your work here, how much he relied on your judgment." "Actions matter more than words," Sophia said, but her voice lacked its earlier venom. "He left you everything. That says what he really thought of us. Or it says he knew you were strong enough to build your own legacy, while I needed the foundation to build mine. It was a generous interpretation, and they all knew it. But sometimes generous interpretations were what families needed to move forward." Morrison cleared his throat. "If we're going to implement these changes, we need to start with the board meeting next week. They'll want to see a clear vision for the company's future direction." "Then let's give them one," Zara said. She looked around the table at the faces of her newfound family, wary but not hostile, hurt but not broken. Together, for the first time since she'd learned of her inheritance, the weight of it didn't feel quite so overwhelming. She still had more money than she knew what to do with, a company to learn to run, and a family to figure out how to love. But she also had help. People who understood the business, even if they didn't yet understand her, and people who were beginning to understand that sometimes the best way to honor the past was to change the future. The meeting ended with tentative plans for the board presentation, and a dinner that evening where they could continue planning in a less formal setting. As the others filed out, Marcus lingered behind. "You remind me of him, you know," he said quietly. "Not the Richard who signed those papers, but the man he was when your mother worked here. Hopeful, determined to change things. Is that good or bad? I suppose we'll find out." Marcus paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I think Celeste would be proud of you. And I think Richard knew exactly what he was doing when he left you everything." As Zara sat alone in the boardroom, surrounded by the detritus of her father's business empire, she felt the ghost of her mother's presence. Celeste had cleaned rooms like this, had walked these halls knowing that her love was both the most important and most dangerous thing in her life. Now it was Zara's turn to navigate the complexities of wealth and power, family and responsibility. But unlike her parents, she wouldn't have to do it alone. The Blackstone family dinner was held in a dining room that could have hosted a state banquet. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a table set for 6, though one chair would remain empty. A fact that seemed to weigh on everyone present as Maria served the first course. Zara had spent the afternoon in her father's study, reading through more of his personal papers. What she'd found had shaken her understanding of him once again. Not just business documents, but journals, letters to lawyers about setting up college funds for children he'd never publicly acknowledged, and most surprisingly, draft after draft of letters to her that he'd never sent. "You're quiet tonight," Marcus observed, cutting into his salmon with surgical precision. "I found something today," Zara said, pulling a worn leather journal from her purse. "Dad's diary from 1997, the year I was born." Isabella and Sophia exchanged glances. They'd spent the afternoon at the office, going through company records to prepare for the board meeting, and the temporary truce they'd achieved seemed to be holding. "Are you sure you want to share that?" Isabella asked. "Some things are meant to stay private." "Maybe. But I think you all need to understand who he really was before we decide how to move forward." Zara opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was her father's, but younger, more emotional than the controlled script of his later business correspondence. "March 15th, 1997, she read aloud. "Celeste is gone. Maria found her letter this morning, and the nursery. Victoria destroyed everything. The clouds I painted on the walls, the mobile I hung over the crib, even the rocking chair where I planned to read to our daughter every night. All of it gone. Her voice caught, but she continued. I called the police, but Victoria has alibis, witnesses, explanations for everything. She's made it clear that if I try to find Celeste, she'll follow through on her threats. My lawyers tell me that with Victoria's connections, she could make good on her promise to have the baby taken away. I can't risk that. I can't risk my daughter paying for my cowardice. The dining room was silent except for the soft clink of silverware as Sophia set down her fork. I've hired investigators anyway, Zora continued. Not to contact them, just to know they're safe. To know my daughter is healthy and happy. It's the only thing keeping me sane. Victoria thinks she's won, but she doesn't understand. She's made an enemy for life. I will spend every day finding ways to make her pay for what she's stolen from us. There's more, Zora said, flipping pages. Entries about how he started documenting Victoria's affairs, her financial indiscretions, building a case against her that he never used. Why didn't he use it? Marcus asked. Because by the time he had enough evidence to destroy her, I was settled in school, making friends. He was afraid that disrupting Victoria's life would somehow disrupt mine. Isabella leaned forward. He chose protecting you over getting revenge on her? For 23 years. Until Victoria died, and it was too late to matter. Zora closed the journal. But here's what really gets me. He wrote to me almost every week. Letters he never sent, updating me on his life, asking about mine, telling me how proud he was of things he'd learned about through the investigators. That's... Sophia struggled for words. That's heartbreaking. It gets worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. Zora pulled out a business document. In 2010, he set up a scholarship fund at Wayne State University, my college, specifically for single mothers studying education. He funded my degree without me ever knowing it. The implications hung heavy in the air. Richard hadn't just watched from a distance. He'd found ways to support his daughter's dreams while respecting his promise to stay away. The other women, Marcus said quietly, after Celeste left, were they? Attempts to fill the void she left, yes. But also something else. Zora opened the journal to a later entry. I met Carmen today. 22, working 3 jobs to support her sick mother, reminds me so much of Celeste at that age. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help myself. She needs help, and I need to pretend, just for a while, that I'm the kind of man who could have saved Celeste if I'd been brave enough. He wasn't a predator, Zora said, looking directly at Isabella and Sophia. He was a broken man trying to save other women, because he couldn't save the one he'd lost. It doesn't excuse the affairs, but it explains them. And the children? Isabella asked. He loved them. All of them. But they weren't replacements for me. They were reminders of what he'd given up. That's why he could never fully commit to their mothers. Why those relationships always ended badly. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. I owe you an apology. What I said about him having a pattern. I was trying to hurt you because I was hurt. We all say things we don't mean when we're scared, Zora replied. But I need you all to understand something. I didn't come here to judge him or you. I came here to understand my family. All of it. The good, the bad, and the complicated. Maria appeared from the kitchen, carrying dessert, but also looking like she had something important to say. Perdón, but there's something else you should know. About why your papa never remarried after Victoria died. Everyone turned to look at her. He was waiting, Maria said simply. Waiting for what? For your mama to come home. Even after she got sick, even after the doctors said there was no hope, he kept believing she might change her mind. That maybe, if she knew Victoria was gone. But she never contacted him, Marcus said. She did. Maria's revelation hit the table like a bomb. One letter, 6 months before she died. She asked if he still loved her, if there might be a chance for them to be together in whatever time she had left. Zora's breath caught. What did he say? He never got the letter. Victoria had been intercepting his mail for years, even after she moved out of the main house. She had friends on the staff, people who owed her favors. Your mama's letter went straight to Victoria, who burned it. But Victoria was dead by then, Isabella protested. Victoria died in 2017. Your mama's letter came in 2018. But Victoria's influence lived longer than she did. Some of the staff were still afraid of her, still following her old instructions. The cruel irony of it was staggering. Celeste had finally reached out, finally been ready to risk everything for love, and Victoria's poison had reached beyond the grave to destroy their last chance at happiness. Who intercepted the letter? Zora asked, her voice deadly quiet. The head butler at the time. He's long gone now, retired to Florida with a very generous pension that Victoria arranged. We need to find him, Marcus said immediately. Make him confess what he did. Why? Sophia asked. It won't bring either of them back. Because, Zora said, standing from the table, there might be other letters, other communications that were intercepted. My father spent the last year of his life thinking the woman he loved had chosen to die alone rather than reach out to him. The thought of her father's final months, lonely, bitter, making business decisions out of pain, suddenly made terrible sense. There's something else, Maria said reluctantly. Your papa, in his last weeks, he started drinking heavily. The grief, the regret, it was killing him faster than the cancer. He had cancer? This was the first Zora had heard of it. Pancreatic. Diagnosed 6 months after your mama died. The doctor said stress could have triggered it. Losing the love of your life, then finding out she'd died thinking he'd abandoned her. Maria wiped her eyes with her apron. He gave up fighting. Said he deserved to suffer for being such a coward. The full tragedy of her parents' story was now clear to Zora. 2 people who'd loved each other for 30 years, kept apart by one woman's vindictive cruelty, dying within months of each other, never knowing how close they'd come to reunion. I want to see the letter, Zora said suddenly. What letter? Marcus asked. The one Mom wrote. If Victoria burned the original, there might be copies. Mom always made copies of important things. It was a habit from her office cleaning days. She'd seen too many important documents get lost or destroyed. Isabella looked skeptical. Even if there were copies, where would they be? In her things. The boxes I couldn't bear to go through after she died. Zora was already reaching for her phone. I need to go back to Detroit. Zora, wait, Sophia said. Even if you find the letter, what will it change? They're both gone. It might not change anything for them, but it could change everything for us. She looked around the table at the faces of her family. Her father's brother, his daughters, the woman who'd known her mother better than anyone else alive. We're all carrying their ghosts, she continued. Dad's guilt, Mom's sacrifices, Victoria's cruelty. It's poisoning everything. Our relationships with each other, our ability to move forward, our understanding of what this family can be. And reading a letter will fix that? Isabella asked. Reading a letter will give us the truth. The whole truth, not just pieces filtered through pain and regret and 30 years of secrets. Marcus nodded slowly. She's right. We've been building our understanding of the past on assumptions and half-truths. If we're going to work together, we need to know what really happened. I'll come with you, Isabella said suddenly. Everyone stared at her in surprise. You will. Someone should. And Isabella looked uncomfortable but determined. I want to see where you grew up. Want to understand what our uncle's choices cost your mother. I'll come too, Sophia added. If we're doing this family truth-seeking thing, we might as well do it together. Maria clapped her hands together. Que bueno. A family trip. Your mama would be so happy to see you all together. As they made plans for the trip to Detroit, which would have to wait until after the board meeting, Zora felt something shifting in the dynamics around the table. The suspicion and hostility were giving way to something more complex. Shared purpose, mutual curiosity, and maybe even the beginnings of genuine affection. "There's one more thing," she said as they prepared to leave the dining room. "When we get back, I want to host a dinner here for all of Dad's other children. All my half-sisters." "Zara," Marcus warned, "that could be complicated. Some of those women have very negative feelings about Richard." "Then it's time we address that too. This family has been broken by secrets long enough. If we're going to build something better, we need to acknowledge all the damage that's been done." Isabella and Sophia exchanged another look, one that seemed to contain an entire conversation. "What?" Zara asked. "Nothing," Sophia said. "It's just, you sound like him. Like Uncle Richard when he was passionate about something. Determined to fix things no matter how complicated they get. Is that good or bad?" "Ask us after the board meeting," Isabella replied with a slight smile, the first genuine smile Zara had seen from her. As they said their goodnights and went to their respective rooms, Zara felt the weight of the day's revelations settling on her shoulders. Her father hadn't been perfect, but he'd been human, flawed, grief-stricken, and ultimately destroyed by his inability to fight for the love that defined his life. Tomorrow, she would face a boardroom full of people who expected her to be either a pushover or a tyrant. She would have to convince them that a waitress from Detroit could run a multi-million-dollar company while fundamentally changing its values. But tonight, she would sit in her father's study, reading his letters to a daughter he'd never sent, and finally understanding the man whose legacy she'd inherited. The ghosts they carried were heavy, but maybe together they could finally lay them to rest. The Blackstone Industries boardroom had never felt more intimidating. Zara sat at the head of a table that stretched like an aircraft carrier, surrounded by 12 of the most powerful business leaders in Boston. Their faces ranged from skeptical to openly hostile, and their expensive suits seemed to form a protective barrier against change. "Ladies and gentlemen," James Morrison began, "I'd like to introduce Zara Williams, now Zara Blackstone, Richard's daughter and the new majority owner of Blackstone Industries." The murmur that rippled around the table was far from welcoming. Board Chairman William Hayes, a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and disappointment, leaned forward with barely concealed disdain. "With all due respect, Ms. Williams," he said, deliberately using her old name, "this company has been built on decades of careful strategic planning. We can't afford to have our direction dictated by someone with no business experience." "You're absolutely right," Zara replied calmly. "I have no business experience. What I do have is a 51% controlling interest and a very clear vision for this company's future." She stood and activated the presentation screen behind her. The first slide showed 2 photographs, the original Riverside neighborhood and the luxury condos that had replaced it. "This is the Riverside development. In 2018, Blackstone Industries displaced 300 families to build luxury housing that none of those families could afford. It generated $200 million in profit and employed 500 construction workers, boosted local property values, and increased the city's tax base," interrupted board member Patricia Chun, CEO of a major consulting firm. "That's responsible development. For whom?" Zara clicked to the next slide. Photos of families living in overcrowded apartments across the city, children in new schools where they didn't know anyone, elderly residents separated from communities they'd lived in for decades. "These are some of the families we displaced. This is Maria Santos, 67 years old, who had to move 40 minutes away from her job because she couldn't afford anything closer. This is the Rodriguez family. Their son had to change schools 3 times because they kept getting priced out of neighborhoods." The room shifted uncomfortably. Several board members avoided looking at the photos. "Business decisions have consequences beyond profit margins," Zara continued. "And this company is going to start acknowledging those consequences." Hayes's face was growing redder by the minute. "Are you suggesting we apologize for making sound investments? That we somehow owe these people?" "I'm not suggesting it. I'm announcing it. Zara clicked to the next slide. A detailed plan for the Riverside Restoration Fund. We're going to spend $50 million providing real relocation assistance to every family displaced by our development. Down payments for homes in neighborhoods they choose, job training, educational support for their children. The explosion of voices was immediate and overwhelming. $50 million? This is corporate suicide. The shareholders will revolt. You'll bankrupt us within a year. Zara waited for the chaos to die down before continuing. I'm also announcing the formation of a new division, Blackstone Community Development. Instead of displacing communities, we're going to invest in strengthening them. She clicked through slides showing affordable housing projects, community centers, small business incubator programs. Every future development will include provisions for existing residents. We'll build up, not out. We'll create opportunities, not take them away. This is exactly what we were afraid of, said board member Thomas Kellerman, a sharp-faced man who'd been Richard's longest-serving advisor. You're letting emotion drive business decisions. Your father would never have approved this kind of idealistic nonsense. Actually, Marcus spoke up for the first time, he would have. At least, the man I knew would have. All eyes turned to him. Marcus stood slowly, his expression grave. I've been thinking about Richard's last few years, the decisions that seemed increasingly disconnected from the values he'd built this company on. I think I understand now why he changed. Marcus, don't. Isabella warned from her seat along the wall where she and Sophia were observing. No, they need to hear this. Marcus looked directly at Kellerman. Tom, you knew Richard for 30 years. Did the man who approved the Riverside displacement seem like the same person who started this company by renovating affordable housing for working families? Kellerman's expression flickered with uncertainty. Richard changed after his wife died, Marcus continued, but not in the way people thought. He became harder, more ruthless, because he was trying to build something big enough to fill the hole in his life. The problem was, the hole was never meant to be filled by money. This is touching family therapy, Hayes interrupted. But we have fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders. We can't throw away millions on gilt projects. What if I told you the gilt projects would be more profitable in the long run? Zora asked. The room fell silent. Community development creates loyal customers, stable markets, and positive public relations. Luxury developments create short-term profits and long-term resentment. Which do you think is more sustainable? She clicked to financial projections that Morrison and the company's finance team had spent 3 days preparing. Our analysis shows that community-focused development generates 15% lower profits per project, but creates markets that sustain themselves for decades instead of burning out in 5 years. These are theoretical numbers, Chun protested. Based on real-world examples from companies that have tried this approach. Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, Interface Incorporated, companies that prioritized social responsibility and thrived financially because of it, not despite it. Kellerman leaned back in his chair, studying the projections with the attention of a man who'd built his career on reading financial tea leaves. Even if your numbers are accurate, and I'm not saying they are, this represents a fundamental shift in how this company operates. You're talking about retraining staff, restructuring departments, changing relationships with contractors and suppliers. Yes, I am. And you think you can manage that kind of transformation with no business experience? I think I can manage it with help from people who have business experience and want to build something better. Zora looked directly at Marcus. I'm offering partnership to anyone on this board who wants to be part of creating a company that makes money by making life better, not by making life harder. And those who don't want to be part of it? Hayes asked coldly. Are welcome to sell their shares back to the company at current market value. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Hayes's face had moved past red into purple territory. You're forcing us to choose between our principles and our positions. I'm asking you to examine whether those two things should be in conflict." Isabella suddenly stood from her observer chair. "May I say something?" All eyes turned to her. Zara nodded, though she had no idea what her half-cousin was about to do. "I've worked for this company for 8 years," Isabella began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I've watched us make decisions that were financially sound but morally questionable. I told myself that business was business, that we couldn't save everyone, that good intentions didn't pay salaries." She walked to stand beside Zara. "But yesterday, I looked at the faces of the families we displaced, and I realized something. We didn't just take their homes. We took their sense that hard work and community matter, that there are still places in this world where people look out for each other." Sophia stood as well, joining her sister. "The question isn't whether we can afford to change. It's whether we can afford not to. How many more Riversides before we become the kind of company that destroys more than it builds?" The sisters' support clearly surprised the board members, several of whom had worked with Isabella and Sophia for years. "This is mutiny," Hayes declared. "Richard is barely cold in his grave, and you're dismantling everything he built." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're restoring it. The Richard who built this company believed business should serve communities, not exploit them. Somewhere along the way, he lost sight of that. We're just finding our way back." The vote, when it came, was closer than Zara had dared hope. 7 in favor of the new direction, 5 opposed. 3 of the opposing members immediately tendered their resignations, while the others agreed to try the new approach for 1 fiscal year. As the meeting ended and board members filed out, some shaking hands, others pointedly avoiding eye contact, Zara felt the weight of what she'd just set in motion. She'd essentially bet the company on the belief that doing good could be good business. Hayes was the last to leave, pausing at the door to deliver what was clearly meant to be a parting shot. "You know, Ms. Williams, your father spent the last decade of his life proving that idealism is a luxury this company can't afford. I give you 18 months before you're begging us to come back and clean up the mess you've made." "Mr. Hayes," Zara replied quietly, "my father spent the last decade of his life proving that success without purpose is just expensive emptiness. I'd rather fail trying to build something meaningful than succeed at building something hollow." After Hayes left, the remaining board members and family gathered around the conference table. The atmosphere was strange, part victory celebration, part funeral for the company they'd known. "So," Morrison said, closing his laptop, "what's our next move?" "Detroit," Isabella said immediately. "We need to find that letter before we go any further. If we're rebuilding this company on the foundation of Richard and Celeste's love story, we need to know how that story really ended." As they prepared to leave the boardroom, Zara's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, a Detroit area code. "Zara Williams?" The voice was young, female, nervous. "Yes. My name is Carmen Rodriguez. I think Richard Blackstone was my father." The words hit Zara like lightning. One of her half-sisters, calling just hours after she'd committed to finding them all. "Carmen," she breathed, "I've been hoping to hear from you. I saw the news about the inheritance online. About you being his daughter." Carmen's voice was shaky. "I wasn't sure if I should call, but my mom said. She said he was a good man who made bad choices, and maybe his daughter would understand." Zara looked around at the faces of her family, Marcus, Isabella, Sophia, all watching her navigate this unexpected moment. "I'd like to understand," she said. "Would you be willing to meet? I'm actually coming to Detroit tomorrow. You want to meet me?" "Carmen, you're my sister. Of course I want to meet you." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Zara worried the call had dropped. When Carmen spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "I've been wanting a sister my whole life." As Zara hung up the phone, she realized that finding her father's letter might be only the beginning of the discoveries waiting for them in Detroit. The board meeting had been about changing the future of the company, but their trip to Detroit would be about understanding the past that had shaped them all. "One more for dinner?" Sophia asked with a slight smile. "As many as it takes," Zora replied. "It's time this family stopped leaving people behind." The revolution in the boardroom was over. Now the real work of rebuilding a family and a company could begin. The flight to Detroit felt like traveling backward through time. Zora pressed her face to the airplane window as the city spread below them. A patchwork of abandoned lots, struggling neighborhoods, and pockets of stubborn renewal that reminded her why she'd fought so hard to escape, and why she'd never stopped loving the place that raised her. Isabella and Sophia sat across the aisle, looking like exotic birds who'd accidentally flown into the wrong habitat. Their designer clothes and perfectly styled hair seemed almost comical against the backdrop of Zora's working-class hometown. But they'd insisted on coming, and Zora was grateful for their support. "It's smaller than I expected," Isabella said, peering out her own window. "Detroit's like an old boxer," Zora replied. "Looks beaten down from a distance, but up close you can see it's still fighting." The taxi ride from the airport took them through neighborhoods that told the story of American industry in reverse. Past the ruins of factories where her grandfather might have worked, through subdivisions where hope had been foreclosed along with the mortgages, finally arriving at a street that looked like it was hanging on through sheer stubborn will. Zora's old apartment building was exactly as she remembered. 3 stories of faded brick, with window air conditioners that wheezed and a front door that stuck when the weather changed. Mrs. Patterson from 2B was sitting on the front steps, feeding stray cats and watching the world go by. "Zora?" The old woman squinted through thick glasses. "Child, what are you doing back here? And who are these fancy ladies?" "Hey, Mrs. Patterson. These are my cousins. We're here to go through Mom's things." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "I still miss Celeste. That woman had more heart than sense, working herself to death for you. Come here, baby." Zora found herself enveloped in arms that smelled like talcum powder and unconditional love. For a moment, she was 8 years old again, hiding in Mrs. Patterson's apartment when the lights got turned off, pretending not to understand why her mother cried at night. "Your mama was so proud of you finishing college," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Talked about it for months. Said you were going to be a teacher, help other kids learn to love books." "Plans changed," Zora said quietly. "Plans always do. But love don't change. That's what your mama taught me." As they climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, Isabella stumbled slightly in her heels. "How did you do this every day?" "You do what you have to do," Zora replied, fishing out the key she'd kept all these years. Mom used to say these stairs were good exercise. Made her feel like she was climbing towards something better. The apartment door opened to reveal a space that seemed impossibly small after the Blackstone mansion. The living room, kitchen, and dining area were essentially one room, with a tiny hallway leading to the single bedroom and bathroom. "This is where you grew up?" Sophia asked, not unkindly, but with genuine amazement. "This is where I learned that home isn't about square footage. It's about the people who love you enough to make any space feel safe." The boxes were in the bedroom closet, exactly where Zora had left them 3 years ago. 6 cardboard boxes containing 30 years of Celeste Williams' life. Photo albums, important papers, books she'd loved, letters from friends, and hopefully, somewhere in the mess, copies of her final correspondence with Richard. They spread the contents across the small living room floor, creating an archaeology of a life lived quietly, but with great love. Isabella found photo albums filled with pictures of Zora at every age, while Sophia discovered a collection of books with careful notes in the margins. Celeste's ongoing education pursued one library book at a time. She kept everything, Isabella marveled, holding up Zora's kindergarten artwork. Every drawing, every school paper, every little achievement. She said memories were the only things they couldn't take away from us, Zora replied, opening a box labeled important papers in her mother's careful handwriting. Inside were birth certificates, medical records, insurance papers, and, at the very bottom, a manila envelope marked for Zora. When you're ready to know. Zora's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were copies of letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Richard Blackstone at the Boston estate. She wrote to him the whole time, Sophia breathed, reading over Zora's shoulder. The letters spanned 30 years, from Celeste's first months in Detroit through Zora's childhood, adolescence, and college years. Some were newsy updates about Zora's achievements. Others were raw expressions of love and loss that made Zora's heart ache for the loneliness her mother had carried. But it was the final letter, dated just 6 months before Celeste's death, that broke them all. My dearest Richard, I'm dying. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, maybe less. I know I have no right to reach out after all these years of silence, but there are things I need you to know before I go. First, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day in 30 years. I think about you every morning when I wake up, and every night before I sleep. I think about the man who painted clouds on nursery walls and carved our initials in a garden bench. I think about the life we might have had if the world had been kinder to people like us. Second, I was wrong to keep Zora from you. I thought I was protecting her from the pain of being judged, from the complications of your world. But I was really protecting myself from having to share her, from the risk of losing the only piece of you I had left. She's magnificent, Richard. She has your stubbornness and your brilliant mind. But thank God she got my practical sense about money. She's working 2 jobs to put herself through college, studying to be a teacher because she wants to help other kids fall in love with learning. She reads everything she can get her hands on, just like her father. I know you've been watching from a distance. The scholarship at Wayne State has your fingerprints all over it, and I found out about the anonymous donations to my cancer treatment fund. You've been taking care of us, even when we couldn't let you do it openly. That's the man I fell in love with, the one who finds ways to protect the people he loves, even when it costs him everything. I'm writing because I need to know. If I had the courage to come back, if I showed up at your door tomorrow, would there be room for me in your life? Not as your maid, not as your secret, but as the woman who has loved you longer than anyone else alive. Victoria is gone. The obstacles that kept us apart are buried with her. I know I'm asking for a miracle, for you to forgive 30 years of silence, to love a dying woman, to take a chance on happiness when we're both so tired. But if there's even a small part of you that remembers what we had, that believes love can survive anything, please write to me. Please tell me that somewhere in that big house, there's still a place for the girl who used to leave you notes with your lunch. I'll understand if you don't respond. 30 years is a long time, and people change. But I had to ask. I couldn't leave this world without knowing if the love that shaped my life meant something to the man who gave it to me. I love you still. I love you always. You're Celeste. The 3 women sat in stunned silence as the weight of Celeste's final plea settled around them. She had reached out. She had been ready to risk everything for one last chance at love. The intercepted letter, Isabella whispered. This is it. She never knew he didn't get it, Sophia added, tears streaming down her face. She died thinking he'd chosen not to respond. Zora felt something breaking inside her chest. Not her heart, which had been cracked since her mother's death, but something deeper. The story she'd been telling herself about her parents' love was incomplete. It wasn't a tragedy of 2 people kept apart by circumstances. It was a tragedy of 2 people who'd found the courage to reach for happiness, only to have it stolen by the cruelty of someone who couldn't bear to see others find what she'd never had. We have to tell Carmen, she said suddenly, and the other girls. They deserve to know that our father wasn't a man who used women and discarded them. He was a man so broken by losing the love of his life that he kept trying to find pieces of her in other people. How do we even begin to explain this? Isabella asked. Before Zora could answer, there was a knock at the apartment door. Through the thin walls, she could hear a young voice calling her name. "Zara? It's Carmen. Are you in there?" Carmen Rodriguez was 27 years old with dark hair and eyes that were unmistakably Blackstone eyes. She was shorter than Zara, with calloused hands that spoke of physical work and a tentative smile that suggested she'd learned early not to expect too much from life. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "I brought my mom. She's been wanting to meet you." Behind Carmen stood a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. Maria Santos from the Boston estate had mentioned her. One of the women Richard had tried to save, but couldn't quite love the way they deserved. "Rosa Rodriguez," the woman said, extending her hand. "I worked for your father for 2 years. I want you to know he was a good man in a lot of pain." "Please come in," Zara said, though the small apartment was already crowded. We were just reading some letters." Carmen's eyes widened as she saw the papers spread across the floor. "Are those from your mother?" "Including the one she sent to our father just before she died. The one he never received." Rosa's face went pale. "What do you mean, never received?" Isabella explained about Victoria's posthumous interference, about the staff member who'd been intercepting Richard's male years after his wife's death. With each detail, Rosa's expression grew more stricken. "Oh, Dios mío," she whispered. "He thought she didn't want him. All those last months, when he was so angry, so bitter. I thought it was just the sickness, but he was dying thinking the woman he loved had rejected him one final time." "There's something else," Carmen said quietly. "Something Mom told me about why she left his employment." Rosa looked uncomfortable, but she nodded for her daughter to continue. "Mom got pregnant with me, and when she told him, he offered to marry her. Not because he loved her, but because he thought it was the right thing to do. He said he couldn't let another child grow up without a father." "But you turned him down," Sophia guessed. "Because I could see he was trying to replace someone else," Rosa said. "Someone he talked about in his sleep. Someone whose name he called when he thought no one could hear. Celeste. Always Celeste. I told him I deserved to be someone's first choice, not their consolation prize," Rosa continued. "He understood. He set up the trust fund for Carmen and helped me find a better job with one of his business partners. But he wasn't angry. He was relieved. The pattern was becoming clear to all of them. Richard's relationships after Celeste hadn't been about conquest or power. They'd been desperate attempts to build the family he'd lost, to create some version of the happiness that had been stolen from him. "He loved your mother more than life itself," Rosa told Zora. "Every woman who came after was just an echo. We all knew it. Most of us were echoes ourselves, trying to replace someone we'd lost." Carmen pulled out her phone and showed them a photo of a young boy with dark hair and familiar eyes. "This is my son, Miguel. He's 8. I've been wondering if I should tell him about his grandfather." "You should," Isabella said immediately. "He deserves to know about the family he comes from. All of it, the good parts and the complicated parts." "There's something else," Carmen said hesitantly. "I've been in touch with Elena and Sophia, our other half-sisters. They want to meet too, if you're willing." "Of course I'm willing. We're family. Even though we complicate your inheritance, even though sharing Richard's legacy means less for you." Zara looked around the tiny apartment where her mother had sacrificed everything to give her a chance at something better. Then she looked at the faces surrounding her, Isabella and Sophia, who'd started as adversaries and become allies, Carmen and Rosa, who represented the complexity of her father's pain, and the ghosts of her parents, whose love story was finally complete. "The only inheritance that matters is the one Mom gave me," she said. "The knowledge that love is worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. Everything else is just tools to honor that legacy." As evening settled over Detroit, they sat in Celeste's living room reading letters aloud. 30 years of love that had survived separation, poverty, illness, and even death itself. Outside, the city lights flickered on, illuminating a landscape that had seen better days, but refused to surrender. Tomorrow, they would fly back to Boston to begin the work of transforming Blackstone Industries and healing their fractured family. But tonight, in the place where Zara's story began, they were just people who'd found each other across the wreckage of other people's choices. The letter had been found. The truth had been revealed. Now the real work of forgiveness, of Richard, of Celeste, of themselves, could begin. "I have an idea," Zara said as they prepared to leave the apartment for the last time. "What if we don't just change the company? What if we change the story?" "What do you mean?" Carmen asked. "I mean, what if we turn Mom and Dad's love story into something that helps other people? A foundation, maybe, or a program that helps families stay together when economic pressures try to tear them apart." Isabella nodded slowly. The Celeste and Richard Foundation. For families facing impossible choices. For single mothers who need support. For couples who love each other but can't afford to stay together. For children who get caught in the middle of other people's wars, Sophia added. For everyone who's ever had to choose between love and survival, Carmen concluded. As they locked the apartment door and walked down the stairs one final time, Zara felt her mother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. Celeste had spent 30 years turning her pain into purpose, her loss into love for the daughter who'd never known her father. Now it was Zara's turn to transform that legacy into something that could reach beyond their own story to touch other lives, other families, other chances at happiness that might otherwise be lost to pride, fear, or the cruelty of people who couldn't bear to see others find what they'd never had. The revolution had started in a boardroom, but it would be won in living rooms like this one, where ordinary people made extraordinary sacrifices for love. The Blackstone estate had never hosted a dinner quite like this one. 3 weeks after their return from Detroit, Zara stood in the main dining room watching Maria and 2 additional caterers set the table for 12, a number that would have been impossible to imagine when she'd first learned of her inheritance. Tonight, for the first time in over 30 years, all of Richard Blackstone's children would gather under one roof. "Are you nervous?" Isabella asked, adjusting the flowers at the center of the table. Over the past month, she'd transformed from adversary to ally to something approaching a real sister, and her presence had become one of Zara's greatest sources of strength. Terrified, Zara admitted. What if this is a disaster? What if bringing everyone together just opens old wounds instead of healing them? Then we'll deal with it as a family, Sophia said, appearing from the kitchen with wine glasses. That's what families do, they survive disasters together. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of change. The Riverside Restoration Fund had launched to national media attention, with families already receiving their first assistance checks. Blackstone Industries stock had initially dropped on news of the company's new direction, then rebounded higher than ever as investors realized they were getting in on the ground floor of something revolutionary. But more importantly, the family had begun to heal. Isabella and Sophia had moved into guest rooms at the estate temporarily, while they worked on transitioning their roles at the company, though everyone suspected the arrangement was becoming permanent. Marcus had begun sharing stories about Richard's early years that painted a picture of a man far more complex, and carrying than the bitter figure of his final decade. The first to arrive was Carmen, accompanied by her 8-year-old son Miguel and her mother Rosa. The boy's eyes went wide as he took in the mansion's grandeur. "Is this really where our grandfather lived?" he asked in a voice hushed with awe. "It is." Zara knelt down to his eye level. "And you know what? He would have loved meeting you. He would have read you stories and taught you to play chess, and probably would have spoiled you terribly. How do you know? Because that's what grandfathers do. And because he loved children, especially ones with eyes like yours." Miguel's eyes, Richard's eyes, passed down through another generation, sparkled with curiosity. "Can I see his room? Can I see where he kept pictures of all of us?" The innocence of the question broke Zara's heart and mended it simultaneously. "Of course you can. After dinner, I'll show you everything. Elena Martinez arrived next with her 15-year-old daughter Sofia, both of them looking nervous but determined. Elena was closest to Zora's age, a nurse who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through school while raising her daughter alone. Sofia had her grandfather's stubborn chin and her mother's fierce intelligence. I wasn't sure we should come, Elena said quietly as Zora embraced her. This feels like intruding on something that isn't really ours. It's absolutely yours, Zora replied firmly. He was your father too, and this is your family too. We've all spent too much time on the outside looking in. The last to arrive was Lucia Santos, 23 years old and visibly pregnant, accompanied by her girlfriend Jamie, a detail that would have scandalized Victorian-era society, but felt perfectly natural in the accepting warmth Maria had created in the kitchen. I'm sorry we're late, Lucia said breathlessly. The baby's been making me sick all day, and I almost didn't come. But I told her she was being ridiculous, Jamie added with a smile. This is exactly the kind of thing her father would have wanted, family coming together. As they gathered in the main parlor before dinner, the resemblances were striking. Miguel had Richard's eyes and chin. Sofia had inherited his height and the way he held his head when he was thinking. Elena had his hands, long-fingered and graceful. Carmen had his stubborn streak, evident in the way she defended her mother's choices. Lucia had his laugh, a discovery that made everyone stop talking the first time they heard it. But it was the differences that made them beautiful as a group. Where Richard had been emotionally guarded, his daughters were open and warm. Where he'd been solitary by nature, they gravitated toward each other, forming instant connections across the barriers of age and experience. I have something for everyone, Zora said, pulling out a box she'd prepared with Morrison's help. Inside were copies of their father's journals, the letters he'd written to Zora but never sent, and most precious of all, individual letters he'd written to each of them in the months before his death. He knew about all of us? Lucia asked, her voice barely a whisper. He kept track of every one of you. Birthdays, graduations, achievements, struggles. He might not have been present, but he was never absent. Carmen opened her letter with trembling hands and began to read aloud. My dear Carmen, if you're reading this, then Zora has found you, and you've found each other. I hope you can forgive an old man's cowardice in writing words I never had the courage to say. You were never a mistake. Neither were your sisters, neither was the love I had for your mothers. You were all attempts by a broken man to build something beautiful from the wreckage of his life. I know I failed you all. I gave you money when you needed a father, support when you needed love, distance when you needed connection. I was so afraid of failing you the way I'd failed your half-sister and her mother that I didn't realize I was failing you in different ways. But I want you to know, every day of your life has been a gift to me. Every report card, every photo, every milestone, they've all been lights in the darkness of missing Celeste. You and your sisters gave me reasons to keep going when I'd lost the reason I'd started living in the first place. I hope you find each other. I hope you build the family I never had the courage to create. And I hope you can forgive me for loving you all from such a distance. Your father, always. Richard. The room was silent except for the soft sounds of crying. Each letter was different. Personal, specific, revealing how closely Richard had followed each of their lives. But they all carried the same message. Love constrained by fear, regret tempered by hope, and a dying man's wish that his children would find in each other what he'd been too afraid to give them himself. He watched us, Elena said wonderingly, holding her own letter. All these years, thinking we were alone, and he was watching. Like our grandfather in heaven, Miguel said matter-of-factly. Mom says people who love us watch from heaven even when we can't see them. Exactly like that, Isabella agreed, and Zara realized that her half-cousins had fully embraced their new extended family. Maria appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dinner is ready, Ms. Nina's. Your papa would be so happy to see you all together. The dining room had been transformed for the occasion. Candles flickered on every surface. Flowers from the garden where Richard and Celeste had fallen in love graced the table, and place cards bore each person's name in Maria's careful script. But it was the empty chair at the head of the table that drew everyone's attention. The chair where Richard would have sat if he'd lived to see this gathering. Should we leave it empty? Carmen asked. No, Zora said suddenly. Miguel, would you like to sit there? You're the youngest, and you represent the future of this family. The 8-year-old boy's eyes went wide. Really? I can sit in Grandpa's chair. I think he'd like that. I think he'd like knowing that his place at this table belongs to the next generation. As Miguel climbed into the chair that was too big for him, something magical happened. The formality of the occasion dissolved into something much more precious. An actual family dinner, complete with past dishes, shared stories, and the comfortable chaos of people who were beginning to genuinely care about each other. Sophia, the 15-year-old, peppered Isabella and Sophia with questions about running a business. Lucia and Elena compared notes on single motherhood, while Jamie and Rosa discovered a shared love of gardening. Carmen told stories about her work as a social worker that made everyone realize how much she'd inherited their father's desire to help people. I have an announcement, Zora said as Maria served dessert. The Celeste and Richard Foundation is officially launching next month. What will it do? Sophia asked. Everything we've talked about. Support for single mothers, assistance for families facing economic hardship, programs to help people who have to choose between love and survival. Zora looked around the table at the faces of her family. But I don't want to run it alone. I'd like all of you to be involved, if you're interested. What kind of involvement? Elena asked. Carmen, you're a social worker. You understand the systems we're trying to change. Elena, you're a nurse who's seen how poverty affects health. Lucia, you're an artist. You understand how dreams get deferred when survival takes priority. And us? Isabella asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. You too understand business. You know how to make sure the foundation is sustainable, how to create programs that help people instead of just making us feel good about helping. What about me? Miguel piped up from his grandfather's chair. I want to help too. You, Zora said seriously, will be our consultant on what kids need. Every program we create, we'll ask, would this have helped Miguel? Would this have helped his mom? Would this have made their life better? The boy beamed with the importance of his role. There's one more thing, Zora continued. I want to buy back the Riverside property. The table went quiet. Not to tear down the condos. That would displace the people living there now. But to build affordable housing next to them. To create a mixed-income community where families like the ones we displaced can afford to live alongside the people who replaced them. That will cost a fortune, Rosa pointed out. We have a fortune. The question is whether we use it to make more money or to make more opportunities for people who need them. Marcus, who had been quietly observing from his seat, finally spoke. Richard would be proud of you all, not just for the money you're willing to spend, but for the family you're building from his failures. They weren't all failures, Carmen said softly. We exist because of choices he made. Flawed choices, maybe, but choices that led to us being here together. And Mom and Dad's love story, Zora added. It wasn't a tragedy in the end. It was the beginning of all of this. All of us finding each other, building something better from their sacrifices. As the evening wound down, and the family began to prepare for departure, Miguel tugged on Zora's dress. Can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Do you think Grandpa and your Mama are together now? Like in heaven? The question, asked with a child's absolute faith in happy endings, brought tears to Zora's eyes. She knelt down to meet his gaze. I think they're together in all the ways that matter. In the love that created this family, in the foundation we're building in their names, in the way we take care of each other because of what they taught us about love. So they got their happy ending. We're their happy ending, Miguel. All of us together. As cars pulled away and the house settled into quiet, Zara found herself alone in the garden where her parents had fallen in love. The bench was exactly as she'd found it that first morning, with their initials still carved into the wood. But now it didn't feel like a monument to lost love. It felt like the foundation stone of something new. A family built on truth instead of secrets. A company dedicated to building up instead of tearing down. A foundation that would turn one couple's sacrifice into opportunities for thousands of other families. Isabella appeared beside her in the darkness. Thinking deep thoughts? Thinking grateful thoughts. A month ago, I was a waitress with no family and no future. Tonight, I had dinner with 6 siblings, 3 nieces, and enough purpose to last several lifetimes. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we change the world. One family at a time. As they walked back toward the house, Zara caught a glimpse of movement in an upstairs window. Marcus, closing the curtains in what had been Richard's study. The house was full of people now, full of life and laughter, and the sound of children playing in hallways that had been silent too long. The inheritance had been more than money. It had been a chance to rewrite their family's story, to turn 3 decades of separation into a foundation for connection, to transform her parents' interrupted love affair into a legacy of love that could reach far beyond their own lives. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Thank you for giving me sisters. Miguel is already asking when he can come back and see his new aunts." Then another from Elena. "Sophia wants to intern at the foundation next summer. She says she wants to help families like ours." And finally, one from Lucia. "Jamie and I have been talking. We'd like to name the baby Richard if it's a boy, Celeste if it's a girl. Is that okay with you?" Zara typed back to each of them. "Family always comes back. Family always helps. Family always honors the people who loved us first." Standing in the doorway of the house that had once been a mansion where her mother worked and her father grieved, Zara realized that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it. Not just wealth or security or even justice for the wrongs done to her parents. She'd found home. Not a place, but a people. Not just inheritance, but belonging. The revolution that had started in a boardroom was complete. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Boston Harbor Hotel sparkled with the light of 1,000 candles and the tears of 300 guests who had gathered for the first annual Celeste and Richard Foundation Gala. Zara stood at the podium in a simple black dress. Elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but not intimidating, and looked out at faces that told the story of what love could build when it refused to surrender to circumstance. In the front row sat her family, Isabella and Sophia, now co-directors of the Foundation's business development program. Carmen with Miguel, who'd grown 3 inches and lost 2 teeth, but hadn't lost his determination to help other kids. Elena and Sophia, who had indeed spent the summer interning at the Foundation, and was now its youngest volunteer coordinator. Lucia and Jamie with baby Celeste, born 6 months earlier with her grandfather's eyes and her grandmother's determined chin. Marcus, who'd taken early retirement from Blackstone Industries to run the Foundation's housing development program. And Maria, who'd become the unofficial grandmother to this impossibly extended family. But tonight wasn't just about family. In the audience sat Rosa Martinez, Carmen's mother, now employed as the Foundation's community outreach coordinator for Latino families. Mrs. Patterson from Zara's old apartment building in Detroit, flown in as an honored guest because she'd taught a young girl that love could survive anything if it was strong enough. 3 dozen families who'd been displaced by the Riverside development and were now living in the mixed-income community that had replaced it, not as charity cases, but as homeowners and neighbors and proof that business could be a force for bringing people together instead of pushing them apart. "A year ago," Zara began, her voice carrying easily to the back of the room, "I inherited $500 million from a father I'd never met. The money was supposed to be the story. But money, as it turns out, is never the story. Love is the story. Family is the story. The courage to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. That's the story. I want to tell you about Maria Santos, Zara continued, gesturing toward the front row. 67 years old, displaced from her neighborhood of 40 years, because a company decided luxury condos were more profitable than affordable apartments. The old Blackstone Industries would have written her a check and called it charity. But Maria didn't want charity. She wanted what she'd lost: community, stability, the dignity of having neighbors who knew her name. The spotlight found Maria in the audience, and she stood with the grace of a woman who'd learned to carry herself with pride no matter what circumstances tried to take from her. Today, Maria lives in one of 50 affordable housing units built right next to those luxury condos. Her neighbors include a tech executive, a retired teacher, a young family who just immigrated from El Salvador, and a graduate student studying social work. They share a community garden, host block parties, and prove every day that economic diversity makes communities stronger, not weaker. The applause was thunderous, but Zara waited for it to die down. She had more story to tell. But the real magic isn't in the housing. It's in what happens when you treat people like family instead of problems to be solved. Maria's next-door neighbor is Patricia Chun. Some of you might recognize that name. A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd. Patricia Chun, the former Blackstone Industries board member who had initially opposed Zara's community-focused vision. Patricia lost her husband last year. She was struggling with grief and isolation until Maria knocked on her door with a casserole and an invitation to help tend the community garden. Now Patricia volunteers 15 hours a week with our senior outreach program, and Maria has learned to use Patricia's computer to video call her grandchildren in Puerto Rico. Patricia stood beside Maria, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought I was too old to make new friends," she called out. "Maria taught me that it's never too late for family." "That's what the Celeste and Richard Foundation is really about," Zara continued. "Not just providing assistance, but creating opportunities for people to be family to each other. Because my parents' love story taught me something important. Love doesn't end when people are separated. It multiplies when it finds new ways to express itself." She clicked a button on her remote, and the screen behind her filled with photographs. Families moving into new homes, children graduating from the Foundation's scholarship program, small businesses launched with microloans, community gardens blooming in former vacant lots, elderly neighbors helping young mothers, teenagers tutoring elementary school children, and dozens of other images that showed what happened when resources were directed not toward profit, but toward connection. This year, the Foundation has helped 347 families find stable housing. We've provided 128 scholarships for higher education. We've funded 89 small businesses, created 423 jobs, and served over 15,000 meals through our community kitchens. But more importantly, we've created 2,847 new connections between people who might never have met otherwise. "I want to introduce you to someone special," Zara said, and the spotlight found a young woman near the back of the room. "This is Amanda Chun, Patricia's daughter, who moved to Boston last month to start a new job as a pediatric nurse at Boston Children's Hospital." Amanda stood and waved shyly. Amanda was hired through our healthcare apprenticeship program, but that's not why she's here tonight. She's here because she's also engaged to someone many of you know. The spotlight shifted to reveal a young man standing beside Amanda, tall, with dark hair and familiar eyes. This is David Rodriguez, Carmen's older brother, who graduated from our business development program and is now a financial advisor specializing in helping working-class families build wealth. The gasps and applause from the audience were immediate as people realized what they were witnessing. David and Amanda met at a community garden workshop Maria organized. They bonded over their shared experience of watching their single mothers work multiple jobs to give their children opportunities. They fell in love over conversations about how to build communities where love doesn't have to choose between happiness and survival. Carmen was crying openly now, as was Patricia Chun. Two families, brought together by tragedy and displacement, had created something beautiful and new. But the best part of their story, Zara continued with a smile, is that they've decided to get married right here, in the garden at the Blackstone estate, under the same oak tree where my parents carved their initials 31 years ago. The applause was deafening. In the front row, Miguel was bouncing in his seat with excitement, and baby Celeste was gurgling happily in Lucia's arms. Which brings me to the real reason we're here tonight, Zara said as the crowd settled down. Yes, we're celebrating a year of success. Yes, we're raising money to expand our programs. But mostly, we're here to announce that the foundation is just the beginning. She clicked to the next slide, revealing architectural drawings for a massive development project. Next year, we break ground on the Celeste and Richard community, 50 acres in East Boston that will include 500 units of mixed-income housing, a community health center, a business incubator, 3 schools, and a park designed by landscape architects who specialize in spaces that bring people together across economic and cultural differences. The audience was on its feet before she finished the sentence. But this won't be a Blackstone Industries project imposed on a community. This will be a collaborative effort designed with, and for the people who will live there. Every family displaced by urban development in the past decade will have the option to return. Every small business that was forced to close will have the opportunity to reopen. Every child will have access to education that prepares them not just for college, but for leadership in their communities. And, Zara said, raising her voice over the applause, the project will be managed by the newest division of Blackstone Industries, Blackstone Community Development, under the direction of Isabella and Sophia Blackstone, who have proven that the most profitable investment is investment in people. Isabella and Sophia stood, their faces radiant with the pride of having found their true calling. The company they'd feared would be destroyed by Zara's idealism had instead been transformed into something that made them excited to go to work every morning. The community will also be home to the Celeste Williams Memorial Library and Learning Center, where children like I was, children whose parents work multiple jobs and can't afford tutoring or enrichment programs, will have access to everything they need to dream as big as they want to dream. Zora's voice caught slightly. My mother never got to see me graduate from college, but she'll be present at every graduation ceremony held in that library. In the values she taught me about the dignity of work, the power of education, and the revolutionary act of believing that every child deserves a chance to build a life better than their circumstances suggest is possible. Finally, Zara said, I want to share something personal. Last month, I received a letter from a woman named Victoria Blackstone Chun. No relation to our Patricia. This Victoria is the great-niece of my father's first wife, the woman whose cruelty kept my parents apart for 30 years. The room fell silent with shock and curiosity. This Victoria, wrote to apologize for her great-aunt's actions. She said she'd grown up hearing family stories that made her great-aunt sound like a victim, but as an adult studying the family history, she realized the truth was very different. Zara held up an envelope. But more than apologizing, she wanted to return something that her great-aunt had stolen. She opened the envelope and pulled out a faded photograph. This is a picture of my parents dancing at a company Christmas party in 1996, 2 months before I was born. My father had thought it was lost forever. Victoria Blackstone had taken it from his desk and kept it as some kind of trophy. The photograph appeared on the screen behind her. A young Richard, handsome and happy in a way none of his business associates had ever seen him, holding a radiant Celeste who was glowing with pregnancy and love. This photograph has been traveling for the past month. It's been to Detroit, where it was displayed in my mother's church during a memorial service attended by everyone whose life she touched. It's been to Puerto Rico, where Maria took it to show Celeste's cousins who never got to meet me. It's been to Carmen's son's school, where Miguel did a presentation about his grandfather for Career Day. But tonight, Zora said, her voice strong and clear, this photograph finds its permanent home. The lights dimmed, and behind Zora, a curtain rose to reveal a stunning display case. Inside, alongside the photograph, were Celeste's letters to Richard, his journals chronicling 30 years of love and loss, and a placard that read, Richard and Celeste Blackstone, proof that love survives everything. My parents never got their happy ending, Zora continued as the audience wiped away tears. But we are their happy ending. Every family we help stay together, every child we give opportunities to dream, every community we help build. We are the love story they never got to finish writing. She gestured toward the family section. Miguel, would you come up here? The 8-year-old boy, now 9 and even more confident, bounded onto the stage. Miguel has something to say about his grandfather. Miguel took the microphone with the fearlessness of a child who'd been raised to believe his voice mattered. My grandpa made mistakes, he said clearly. But Mom says mistakes don't define people. What they do after the mistakes defines them. My grandpa spent his whole life missing my grandma Celeste, but he also spent it making sure kids like me would have chances he didn't know how to give us when we needed them. And now we're all together, Miguel continued, and we're helping other families stay together, and I think that makes Grandpa and Grandma Celeste really happy in heaven, because love never dies, it just finds new ways to grow. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. When it finally ended, Zara had one more surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the newest member of our extended family. From the wings walked a young man in his early 30s, holding hands with a woman about the same age and leading 2 small children. This is Michael Blackstone Santos, Richard's nephew, the son of the brother he lost touch with 40 years ago over a family disagreement that nobody can even remember anymore. Michael is a teacher in Los Angeles, married to Susan, father to twins Emma and James. They've come to Boston because they want to be part of rebuilding the family that was broken by pride and misunderstanding. The audience was on their feet again as the family reunion continued to expand in real time. Michael brought something with him, Zara continued. A letter his father, Richard's brother Samuel, wrote before he died, asking Michael to find his uncle and heal the wounds that had kept them apart. I was too late to reconcile with Uncle Richard, Michael said, taking the microphone. But I'm not too late to be part of the family he created. Susan and I have decided to move to Boston. I'll be teaching at the elementary school in the Celeste and Richard community, and Susan will be running the family counseling program. As the evening wound down and guests began to make their way toward the reception, Zara found herself surrounded by the family that had grown from 2 people's interrupted love story into something that could barely fit in the mansion where it had all started. Isabella approached with a champagne flute and a smile that had replaced the suspicion of their first meeting. So, she said, satisfied with your revolution? It's not my revolution anymore, Zara replied, looking around at the faces of people who'd gone from strangers to sisters to partners to family. It belongs to all of us now. Good, Sophia said, joining them, because we have plans for year 2 that are even more ambitious. Such as a program to help other inherited companies transition from profit-only models to community benefit corporations. We've had 67 inquiries in the past month from business owners who want to follow our example. Carmen appeared with Miguel, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Aunt Zora, I have an idea for the foundation. What's that, sweetheart? What if we help kids who don't have grandparents find grandparents who don't have grandkids? Like a matching service for families. The simplicity and brilliance of the idea from a 9-year-old child made all the adults pause. You know what, Miguel? Zora said seriously. That might be the best idea we've heard yet. Want to help us figure out how to make it work? Can I really? Your family. Of course you can really. As the last guests departed, and the family gathered in the garden where it had all begun, Maria appeared with something wrapped in tissue paper. There's one more thing, she said, her eyes twinkling with a secret she'd kept for over a year. She unwrapped a small wooden music box, the kind with a dancing couple on top that spun when the music played. Your papa gave this to your mama for her 20th birthday. She left it behind when she fled, and he kept it on his desk for 30 years. It plays their song. She wound the key, and the gentle melody of Lovey and Rose filled the evening air. As the little dancers spun in their eternal waltz, Zora realized that her parents had gotten their happy ending after all. Not the one they'd dreamed of. Not the house filled with their own children. Not the golden anniversary. Not the rocking chairs on the front porch in their old age. But this, a family that spanned generations and ethnicities and economic backgrounds, a company that built communities instead of destroying them, a foundation that turned their private tragedy into public triumph, and a love story that had multiplied itself into dozens of love stories. They're dancing, Miguel said softly, watching the music box figures. They are, Zora agreed. And so are we. As the family began to make their way back toward the house, their home, their headquarters for changing the world, Zora lingered for a moment by the oak tree where her parents had carved their initials. Someone had added new carvings to the trunk. RB plus CW equals Forever Family. She didn't know which of her siblings had done it, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that 32 years after two young people had fallen in love in this garden, their love had become the foundation for something bigger than either of them had ever dared to dream. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Blackstone, this is Sarah Martinez, a social worker in Phoenix. I work with families facing displacement. I heard about your foundation on the news. We have 127 families here who need what you're building. Can you help us start something like this here? Zora smiled and typed back, * family helps family. When can we talk? *. As she walked back toward the house, she could hear laughter spilling from the windows. Isabella and Sophia arguing good-naturedly about business plans. Carmen telling Miguel a story. Elena helping Lucia get baby Celeste settled. Michael and Susan asking Marcus about Boston schools for the twins. Maria humming in Spanish as she cleaned up from the evening. The sounds of a family. Not perfect, not simple, but real and growing and committed to each other across all the complications that life could throw at them. Richard Blackstone had died thinking he'd failed at love. Celeste Williams had died thinking her love had been forgotten. But love doesn't die when lovers do. It multiplies, it spreads, it finds new hearts to fill and new stories to write and new chances to prove that the most revolutionary force in the world is people choosing to care for each other against all odds. The Black Maid's Daughter had inherited $500 million. But more than that, she'd inherited love. And she'd invested it in the only thing that multiplies when you give it away: family. The music box song drifted out from the house as someone wound it up again, and somewhere in the melody, Zora could swear she heard her parents' laughter, finally free.